Hi, thank you for joining in. Today we're going to look at how we can create logins and map the login to users on a SQL Server database. This is generally a recommended practice in order to keep out unwanted users from accessing sensitive information on your database. Prior to SQL 2005, logins and users could directly access data from a database. However, in newer versions of SQL, especially from SQL 2005 onwards, a login maps to a user and that happens via a schema. So let's go ahead and see how exactly we plan that out. The first thing we need to do is create a login. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use a login that I've already created on the local desktop. As you can see here, I've got a login that's created on the system/account name. So this is basically a Windows login. As you can see, other than a Windows login, you also have the option of creating a SQL Server authenticated login. The difference between the two of them is that the Windows login is actually an account that's created on the operating system of the server or authenticated via Active Directory on the network. A SQL Server authenticated account is an account that is created on the SQL Server instance and does not have any kind of relevance in terms of the actual operating system. A SQL Server authenticated account is generally not a best practice. However, there are scenarios where a SQL Server authentication account becomes useful. This is especially true if you're trying to access data from a heterogeneous database such as MS Access, Oracle, MySQL, etc. Or if you're trying to fetch data from SQL Azure, which is the cloud-based offering of the SQL Server database. For the moment, let's stick with the Windows authenticated account because that's the preferred account or preferred option in terms of enabling security for application accounts. As you can see, this account at the moment defaults to the master database. Now, it's generally a best practice to leave it at the master database instead of choosing the actual MadWorks or any other database that you see here. The reason for this is because if this database is not available, then the application account will not be able to access the system. This is a problem because sometimes this database may be offline or unavailable, at which point the account is not able to access the underlying database. Instead, if you use master, the server could still be running and you will be able to query maybe some information from the underlying database to which this user is permissioned or this login is permissioned. So let's leave it at master for the time being. Now the account that I've created, as you can see, is an agent account. Now an agent account is just an account that I've created, but I'm going to give it permissions to go ahead and access a procedure on the database called MadWorks. This one here. However, if this was to be a system admin or basically an administrator account, then by selecting sysadmin under server roles, I would be able to grant this particular login access to perform server-wide administrative privileges or operations. This means that the login can go ahead and create databases, add and drop logins and other users, as well as perform server level configuration and pretty much any activity that might be required on the server. However, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to stick with just a normal login, which is the application account. At this moment, we don't need to worry about any of the other stuff here. You can simply press OK. If you right click and refresh, you'll see that this new login has been created and the account is agent account. The next thing that we need to do is go ahead and then select the database that we need this particular login to map to. In the database, you'll see that we have users and then we have schemas. At this moment, I am mainly interested in creating a permission so that the user that I've just created will be able to go ahead and execute the procedure, select the number 1. In this case, I can either go ahead directly create a new user, which I will call agent account, and then I will say agent account the user maps to work/agent account the login. Again, we have a number of schemas listed here, but at this moment I'm not really going to go ahead and give any particular schema based permissions. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that agent account, which is the user, has permissions on a very specific object. That object being a store procedure of the name, select the number 1, press OK, press OK. And as you can see here, there are different permissions that you can assign in terms of being able to work with this procedure. The first and most obvious one is execute, which is basically the permission that we need to give. Here what we do is, by selecting grant permission, we have just granted the user agent account the permission to go ahead and execute this particular procedure. As you can see, this is an application account, so I don't want him to be able to alter. So I do not check that box. Press OK. And refresh. Now since this is a Windows authenticated account, I'll not be able to just go ahead and execute it directly because I'm already logged in as the user Jayanth, which is my Windows account. At this moment, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the password for the account that I've just created. So just give me a second. Yeah. And now, in order to go ahead and actually be able to execute as the agent account, I'm just going to choose a different user, and then I'm going to say agent account. And you can see here, this is the first time that this account is being used, so it'll take a second before SQL configures. Coming back now, at this moment the login basically allows me to go ahead and connect to the server, and the mapping between this login to this user in the database allows me to enter into the database after connecting successfully to the server. However, just entering the database is not sufficient, as I will not be able to do anything, so I need to explicitly grant permissions to execute the procedure, which is what I had shown earlier in terms of being able to do the securables over here. As you can see, SQL is still taking a couple of minutes to go ahead and just configure, and this is predominantly because of my system being a bit slow. So let's just give it a second. Okay, and there we go. As you can see here, I've got 2 instances of SQL Server, but I'm going to go ahead and use the one that I've just created. And as you can see here now, I've got one instance which is under work/Jayanth and the other which is work/agent account. Now under agent account, you can see that I'm successfully able to connect to the server. However, if I try to open up any of the other databases, I get the error message saying that the database is not accessible. However, if I open up MadWorks, you can see that I'm successfully able to open up the database. But as you can see here, there are no tables listed. The reason being that I haven't been given any permissions on any of the underlying tables, as you can see here. However, if you go to programmability, you'll see that I definitely do have access to the procedure which I had configured earlier. If I right click now and choose execute procedure and then press OK, I get a successful output. So this is how you want to go ahead and configure a login to use a username and explicitly grant permissions to the actual procedure or objects that you want the user to be able to access. If you do this properly, the user will not be able to go ahead and create or do any other operation other than what is explicitly allowed to do. Configuring this helps make your database far more secure than just leaving it with a DBO privilege or any other account privileges. Try and follow this as far as possible because it is part of what's called a principle of least privileges. The idea behind principle of least privileges is to make sure that every user has just enough permission to do exactly what's needed in order to complete its job successfully. No user will have any permissions other than what it needs, and therefore reduces the attack surface in case your database is compromised. I hope you found this lesson useful, and thank you for watching.